Senator Lacson is recognized on a point of personal privilege. Can the good gentleman from Cavite please state on the record the point of personal privilege which he seeks to be recognized on?
Mr. President, this is about the involvement of the first gentleman, Attorney Jose Miguel T. Arroyo, in conspiracy with some individuals in most, if not all, the efforts to vilify this representation through media and other fora and other matters.
All right.
Of interest, Mr. President.
On that premise, the gentleman from Cavite is recognized on a question of personal privilege, since he alleges that these charges tend to vilify his person. Proceed, Senator Lacson.
I would like to use, I have a PowerPoint presentation, Mr. President, so I'd like to request 1 minute suspension to set up for the PowerPoint presentation.
All right. There is a motion. There is a request that Senator Lacson be allowed to use a PowerPoint presentation. There being no objection, the session is suspended to allow the staff to set up the what's that? The PowerPoint presentation.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed. The chair has been informed that a technical staff is needed on the floor in order to operate the audio-visual presentation. Permission is granted to have the gentleman sit on the floor of the Senate to assist in the operation of the audio-visual equipment. Proceed,
Thank you,
Senator Lacson.
Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues in the Senate of the Republic, I rise today on a matter of personal and collective privilege. It has been more than 2 years since this representation was pilloried before media through accusations so vile and propaganda most vicious. So vile and vicious, in fact, that this Chamber of Peers took notice, conducted investigations, complete with nationally televised public hearings, and just recently unveiled on this floor a committee report which would give the public the impression that my detractors were somehow right. The committee report that came out of the hearings conducted by 3 committees had been signed and sponsored on the floor. The same charges had been investigated in other fora before the Ombudsman even, and dismissed. The prime witness, Angela Mawanay, whose forked tongue the Senate committees dignified through public hearings, has since recanted his false testimony and pointed even to the very powerful spouse of the President of the Republic as the one who masterminded his false revelations. I took little notice of such recantation and confession. But then, recently, Mr. President, I learned that Mawanay's confession about the involvement of the first gentleman in the demolition job against this representation was indeed the truth. Not only because the lawyer who was tasked to take care of Mawanay was indeed a regular fixture in the office inside this building in Makati, a certain attorney Victor Padilla, but also because during all the time that I was being falsely accused by Victor Corpus, he was also visiting the first gentleman in the same building. And sometime in the second week of July 2001, the soldier turned NPA turned soldier again, whom civil society recently honored, received a brown envelope containing a huge amount of dollars, courtesy of the first gentleman. If you may recall, Mr. President, the Secretary of National Defense, Angelo Reyes, admitted during the question hour in this same floor that public monies were authorized to be used by no less than the Commander-in-Chief, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, to finance a fishing expedition sent to Hong Kong and the United States by agents led by Mr. Corpus from June 2 to July 5, 2001. In fact, it was included in a written progress report submitted by a certain Colonel Mario F. Chan, team leader of that ISAF PNP team sent abroad by Mr. Corpus, dated 28 June 2001, stating among others that, and I quote, "On May 20, 2001, Her Excellency President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo approved the mission to the United States based on the recommendation of Colonel Corpus," unquote. It was an expedition that came out with fabulous amounts in more than a dozen foreign accounts, which to this date have not been substantiated. I did not know until recently that apart from these public monies, private money coming from dubious sources had also been given Mr. Corpus. Neither did I know until recently that another lying witness by the name of Mary Ong alias Rosebud had also been a frequent caller of the first gentleman in his office in Makati. In fact, this woman was a visitor in the same office on November 28, year 2002, one of the first gentleman's last callers before he accompanied his wife on a state visit to Japan. While he and the President were yet enjoying the hospitality of the Emperor of Japan, back here in the country, Police Superintendent John Campos was gunned down mercilessly in a roadside eatery in Parañaque during the wee hours of the morning of December 5, year 2002. Less than an hour after the killing took place, Mary Ong's voice was on the airwaves, accusing this representation of having ordered the silencing of Superintendent Campos, a wild accusation even the bereaved family of the deceased would not buy. Yet, upon the return of the first gentleman to the country, who, but no less than Mr. Corpus, would be his very first caller in the early afternoon of Monday, the 9th of December, 2002. I cannot help but wonder, Mr. President, what the trio talked about on those two separate occasions, one just before and the other immediately after Superintendent Campos was gruesomely murdered. Suffice it to say, Mr. President, that as per our own independent investigation, we now have some vital evidence to identify Superintendent Campos's murderers and masterminds. These startling revelations have aroused my curiosity about this office in this building in Makati and the actuations of the very powerful gentleman who lords over it in league with lesser mortals who exercise such great power and influence over the life of this nation, be it in politics or business or even the judiciary. Being an investigator for 30 years, I could not resist my instincts to sleuth. And today, I will share with you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, documented findings about this man and his office in Makati. There is an Indian proverb which goes like this: tell me a fact, and I will learn. Tell me the truth, and I will believe. Tell me a story, and it will live forever in my heart. Let me tell you a fact. Corruption thrives and enjoys incredible and unprecedented growth in the Gloria Macapagal Arroyo government. We all heard about the telecommunications scam, the PCSO anomaly, the wetting scandal, Diosdado P. Macapagal Boulevard, rice smuggling, and many more untold stories of corruption and shady deals. Even the Washington Times agrees. The day after the bombing occurred at the Marriott Hotel in Jakarta, some 3 weeks after a confessed terrorist escaped from Camp Crame, it editorialized, as a result of Algosi's escape, which is the result of corruption in Mrs. Arroyo's government, the world can expect many more bombings and countless more innocent deaths like yesterday's. Let me tell you the truth. I have in my possession, Mr. President, voluminous documents and written testimonies of witnesses that prove tons of money have been delivered and are being delivered to a powerful man I will now fondly call the Incredible Hulk. Money, I understand, keeps him calm and collected. The word collected in this instance means to collect. Now, let me tell you a story. Our story tells of a true-to-life world of corruption, extortion, money laundering, character assassination, and betrayal. For lack of material time, I will only deal today with Chapter 1. Our story begins in this incredible building on 118 Perea Street in Legazpi Village, Makati. Next to Malacanang, this is perhaps the most powerful place in the country. This building has become the citadel of power abuse, where incredible deals are cooked and sinister schemes plotted. This is the LTA building, home to what are we in power for people. This place is a money machine where government deals are hatched and fortunes amassed. Let me now call the roll, Mr. President. Ephraim Genuino, Chairman and President of PAGCOR, the gambling monopoly who visits this incredible building regularly or sends his personal representative, Mr. Ryan Cordeta, to bring in big boxes or big bags. Edgar C. Manda, General Manager of the International Airport, who is likewise the incorporator of Luwalhati Foundation. Jocelyn Jokjok Bolante, Undersecretary of the Department of Agriculture, who reports regularly at this building either alone or in the company of an Indian rice trader, Mr. Kisore Hemlani. Hemlani used to be a small garments trader more than a decade ago. He is now the biggest importer of rice. Most, if not all of it, smuggled from his native India. Ernest Villarreal was chair of the Public Estates Authority until a scandal arose from the most expensive boulevard in the universe, named after President Diosdado P. Macapagal. Ray Nadal, who uses Subic Bay Freeport as the headquarters of his massive import operation of new and slightly used vehicles. Virgilio Angelo, former general manager of the Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Office, since transferred as administrator of OWA, which has billions in trust funds, the pawis ng bagong bayani. Alfonso Cusi of the Philippine Ports Authority, Attorney Teddy Cruz of the Light Rail Transit Authority, Ramon Tulfo, certified extortionist masquerading as a columnist, Alex Magno, political analyst, dating kagalang-galang, sayang, and a lady who I am told is related to Jarius Bondok, another media figure, a certain Mrs. Marisa Bondok. Ronaldo Puno, prominent political operator. Attorney Vic Padilla, the handler of Angelo Ador Mawanay. Victor Corpus, GMA's favorite, Mary Ong Gaba, also known as Rosebud. One Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, newly appointed, was a recent visitor sometime in the first week of May 2003, or after the 13-0 decision on the Corotong Baleleng case in my favor was unbelievably reversed to a 10-4-1 verdict. Another Associate Justice is a bit smarter. He meets with the Incredible Hulk in another floor of the same building. LTA building is the place where criminal minds are given unlimited funds and access to government resources for illegal purposes, where manufactured evidence, concocted stories, and blatant lies are orchestrated to demolish whom the Perea gods wish to destroy. The mantra at LTA is, keep the money flowing and you keep the Incredible Hulk, Mr. Jose Miguel Mike Arroyo, continuously calm and continuously collected, and his gang of operators, con artists, and demolition machines continuously well-funded and fearless. Yes, the Mr. Jose Miguel Arroyo I mentioned is indeed the partner in everything of President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, rather in almost everything. One of the most profitable partnerships ever. Senador at Vice Presidente pa lang si Presidente Arroyo, maganda na ang tubo ng Macapagal at Arroyo partnership. Very, very profitable for very special, outstanding people. Proofs I shall present. Our investigation uncovered that Mr. and Mrs. Jose Miguel Arroyo received at least 321 million pesos in contributions from supporters and favor seekers. We have a long list. Among the donors include the firm of Carpio, Villarasa, and Cruz, which gave 3.5 million. A Franklin Puentebella, whose name is the same as the one linked to the Multitel scam, 0.5 million. Mr. Lucio Co, the biggest importer of everything from canned goods, dressed chicken, to housewares, looks like a piker with just 0.5 million pesos. Regis Romero of the Dos Palmas Resorts episode gave 2 million. DPWH Secretary Florante Soriques, whose current net worth is only 1.5 million pesos, but gave 600,000. I wonder what his net worth was when he gave his contribution. More than his net worth may be. And the presidential political liaison, Mr. Joey Rufino, gave all of 2 million. Out of the 321 million that entered the Perea coffers, only 50.2 million was spent as officially submitted to the COMELEC by the campaign manager, Mr. Jose Miguel Arroyo. So, what happened to the balance of 270.8 million pesos? Where did it go? There are 3 possibilities where you can park 271 million, Mr. President. 1, inside a 6-foot vault. Number 2, use a foundation. And 3, open a secret bank account. A foundation as front, that's when we remembered Congressman Mark Jimenez and his hot expose on Luwalhati Foundation. Curiously, it was during the height of the Jimenez expose when the President surprised the nation by announcing that she will no longer join the 2004 elections. Was she afraid that the 8 million contribution of Mark Jimenez to Luwalhati Foundation that actually ended up at Union Bank Perea branch would be discovered? Was she afraid that the proverbial can of worms involving other transactions would blow up on her face? First, we remembered the news article. Our mission was to look for deposit account numbers 00730014836 and bank and 00730012839. We also remembered Jose Miguel Arroyo complaining that Jimenez besmirched his name and reputation. He asked, "Am I just worth 8 million? Is it in my name? Did it go to my bank account?" Please allow me to provide the answer. Only 2 checks worth 3 million ended up at Union Bank Perea deposit account number 00730012839 under the name of Luwalhati Foundation with Edgar C. Manda, airport manager, as the signatory. The other check of Mark Jimenez ended up in Union Bank Perea deposit account number 0007300014836 under the name of A. Jose Pidal. Who is Jose Pidal? Our investigation led us to LTA building. Pidal's business address is 8th floor, LTA building, Perea Street, Legazpi Village, the same business address as Mr. Jose Miguel Arroyo. We found one of Jose Pidal's return checks where Mark Jimenez's contribution for GMA Foundation ended up. But who is Jose Pidal, Mr. President? Initially, our investigation led us to Morgan Stanley, one of the largest, if not the largest, investment houses in the world. Curiously, both Mr. Jose Pidal and Mr. Jose Miguel T. Arroyo are valued clients. They share the same address, the 8th floor of LTA building. They also have the same financial advisor, Mr. Ronald Gin, Associate Vice President for Investments of San Francisco, California. Let us travel to San Francisco later. In the meantime, let's go local. Let's look at Jose Pidal's return check again and compare Pidal's signature with Mr. Jose Miguel Arroyo's. Let us take a closer comparison. Jose Pidal, Jose Miguel Arroyo. An even closer comparison. Jose Pidal, Jose Miguel T. Arroyo. Pakiulit mo. Jose Pidal, Jose Miguel T. Arroyo. Mr. Jose Pidal, also known as Jose Miguel Arroyo, better get a copy of the Anti-Money Laundering Act, or better still, get his lawyers now. Mike Arroyo, after all, was right, Mr. President. Mark Jimenez's checks did not go to his bank account. It went straight to Jose Pidal's account. Mr. President, that is not all for Mr. Jose Pidal. He also has a bank account at BPI Family Bank, Perea branch, of course. But that's another story. If Mr. Jose Miguel Arroyo, alias Jose Pidal, launders money, we ask the next question. Could he have other washing machines? We discovered 3 more washing machines of Jose Miguel Arroyo, alias Jose Pidal. Kelvin Tan, Thomas To Jr., Victoria Vicky To. Who is Kelvin Tan? Well, he'd better be a rich businessman or an heredero, because this Kelvin Tan is loaded. Let's take a look at Kelvin Tan's bank statement. Surely, the 8th floor of LTA building must have good feng shui. Everybody in that floor seems to have a fat bank account. That is not all, Mr. President. Kelvin Tan maintains a bank account at International Exchange Bank, Perea branch, of course. But that's another story. Wow, Philippines. More than 20 million in just a month's bank statement, or a total of 41 million if you add the Union Bank deposit. And how many people do we know issue pay-to-cash checks with amounts in millions? Kelvin Tan does. 2 million pay-to-cash on December 4, 2002. 8 million pay-to-cash on December 5, 2002. 10 million pay-to-cash again on December 5, 2002. These checks are pre-signed. Why? But first, who encashed those checks? A trusted employee of LTA Incorporated, Tony Labrador. So trusted is this Mr. Antonio Labrador that he even accompanied Mr. Jose Miguel Arroyo and son Mikey to Hong Kong aboard PR 318 on July 18, 2003. This was the trip when the Incredible Hulk reportedly hand-carried an incredibly big black bag aboard the plane, which he clutched all the way to Hong Kong and refused to entrust to the flight attendants, eagerly offering to secure the same at the storage bin. Wow, Philippines. Is Kelvin Tan a corporate genius? For a little background, Mr. President, Kelvin had a failed shoe repair shop, and his dream was to put up a laundry business. I read somewhere he was not able to put up that laundromat, but it looks like he still ended up involved in a laundry operation. Finally, a poor person from the 8th floor of LTA, only 177,000 in this statement, although his most recent bank statement shows a 7.5 million pesos ending balance. If you're a keen observer, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, did you notice something that seems to be always appearing in those Union Bank statements? Yes, Victoria Vicky To. Who is Victoria Vicky To? Why do millions and millions of pesos pass through her? Does she even exist? One thing is sure though, Mr. President, her bank accounts exist. And again, her address is in that luckiest address in the country, 8th floor, LTA building, Perea Street, Legazpi Village, Makati City. But is there a live Vicky To? Or could she be a female version of Jose Pidal? After all, the name To could suspiciously stand for hot, spelled backwards, Mr. President. Guess what? Victoria Vicky To lives. Distinguished colleagues, Mr. President, let us meet the mysterious Victoria Vicky To. Who is Victoria Vicky To, Mr. President? What does she do to be able to have 53 million pesos in bank statement month alone? Victoria Vicky To is really the To triad of 8th floor LTA building, Thomas To Jr. is Vicky's brother. Kelvin Tan is her brother-in-law. The father of Vicky To and Thomas To Jr. owns and operates Anton's Construction Supply, a rather small hardware on General Calentong Street, Mandaluyong City. Vicky To works as a personal secretary and accountant of Mr. Jose Miguel T. Arroyo. Victoria Vicky To, Thomas To Jr., Kelvin Tan, and of course, Jose Pidal, Mr. Jose Miguel Arroyo's laundry machines. For their sake, I can only hope they declared all those millions in their income tax returns. Otherwise, they can always hire the firm of Mr. Jose Miguel Arroyo. As of July 30, 2003, documents that we have revealed the following ending balances. Jose Pidal, 36.6 million pesos. Victoria To, 19.3 million pesos. Thomas To Jr., 7.5 million. Kelvin Tan, 21.1 million. Luwalhati Foundation, 48.2 million. Not really much if we go by Jose Miguel Arroyo's standards. So, the most interesting question is, where does the bulk of the money go? Considering that as per our witnesses' account, 1 billion or more are coming in to Pereya Street in Legazpi Village, Makati City, Mr. President. There are more bank accounts and investments abroad and large tracts of land and real estate properties purchased here and abroad by the incredible Hulk. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I bet Chapter 2 of our story will be more interesting. In the meantime, this representation humbly asks that this matter be referred to the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers, chaired by no less than our esteemed colleague from Bicol and Makati City, the locus of this story. I recall that when our esteemed colleague ran successfully for the Senate, he did so on the resolve to which I fully subscribe. We all fully subscribe, and I quote, "Ubusin ang mga corrupt." I likewise move to refer the same to the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Electoral Reforms, and Revision of Codes and Laws, so that appropriate measures may be crafted to plug loopholes in campaign spending and reporting regulations, as well as to the Committee on Ways and Means, so as to tighten our tax laws, especially as they affect non-stock, non-profit foundations, and to review the implementation of the Anti-Money Laundering Act, which this representation originally authored. I so move, Mr. President. Before Mr. Arroyo and the President decide to dismiss our charge as another plot by the opposition to destabilize the administration, I wish to point out that the issues I raised today are precisely the very issues that our people have bewailed about our government. These are about the unabated corruption in the highest levels of government, not simply in the lower bureaucracy, nor in the military establishment, but right in the heart of Malacanang, or at least in its extension office, the LTA building located in 118 Pereya Street, Legazpi Village, Makati City. I dare the Arroyo Conjugal Partnership to tell our people to ignore the facts and documents I exhibited without explaining themselves, it will only serve to confirm what our people have long suspected about our national leaders. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, our nation is in grave crisis. And our people know that at the root of this all is corruption so endemic, corruption so incredibly huge. Our people are fed up and tired of this type of corruption and hypocrisy practiced by the Arroyo administration. I therefore urge this chamber to heed our people's call for transparency and an honest government. It is time for real change. Kaya naghihirap ang ating bayan ay dahil sa malawakang katiwalian nagaganap ng walang habas at walang pakundangan. Kaya malawak ang katiwalian sa pamahalaan ay sa dahilang ang namumuno ang siyang nangunguna sa paglikha ng katiwalian. Sawang-sawa na ang ating mga kababayan. Hindi na natin kaya ang ganitong uri ng pamamalakad. Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, for your time.
To be recognized earlier, the chair now recognizes the minority leader.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, will the distinguished gentleman from Cavite, the super sleuth of the Senate, yield to some questions?
If the gentleman from Cavite will so yield.
Willingly, Mr. President. To the gentleman from Nueva Ecija, Cebu City, and Quezon City.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will have to, aside from congratulating the gentleman for a well-crafted and well-prepared speech incorporated in his point of personal privilege, I will have to admit that I was somewhat speechless from the middle to towards the end of his expose, if I may call it that. It is seldom, if not at all, do you witness such an expose in the 12th Congress. I will have to admit also that I somewhat have missed the Ernie Maceda days. But so much for that. I want to be enlightened on some of the issues that you brought out, Mr. President. And one of these is the mention of a Attorney Padilla. May I know again who this Attorney Padilla is? You mentioned that he... Did I get it right that he was the person who gave an envelope of US dollars to Colonel Corpus? Is that correct, Mr. President?
No, Mr. President. Attorney Padilla is a close friend of Attorney Mike Arroyo, and he is the handler of Angelo Ador Mawanay.
I see.
The one who gave the brown envelope to Colonel Victor Corpus was Attorney Mike himself.
And how did you know of this, Mr. President?
I have an eyewitness, Mr. President, and he has already reduced what he observed into writing in an affidavit form, including the other information that I revealed during my privilege speech. These are all contained in an affidavit of an eyewitness, Mr. President.
And this exchange of envelope, Mr. President, containing US dollars, happened before the Lacson hanging? I mean, Lacson investigation, Mr. President?
This happened in the second week of July 2001, Mr. President.
Second
right
week
after
of
the
July.
birthday of Attorney Mike. That's the recollection of the witness, Mr. President.
As far as timetable is concerned, Mr. President, what timetable would that fall in? I mean, was that during already the time that Ador Mawanay was talking about Senator Lacson and some other senators and also Mary Ong. Was that the same time?
That is correct, Mr. President. We started the committee hearings, I believe, in August. August or early part of September.
2001.
2001.
Therefore, that is 1 month before.
And before that, there was already too much media hype on the so-called dollar deposits, the $700 million that they alleged I have deposited abroad, Mr. President.
What is the first name again of this attorney Padilla?
Victor Padilla,
Victor
Mr.
Padilla,
President.
I see. And he is a lawyer or one of the lawyers of, works for the first gentleman.
He's actually a close friend of Attorney Mike Arroyo, Mr. President.
I see. Okay. May I fast forward to the John Campos mention? You mentioned that also in your speech, Mr. President. There was a trio who met, you said, concerning the John Campos issue. Will you please refresh me on this issue and elaborate more on this meeting of a trio? And who is this trio?
The meetings took place on 2 occasions. They did not meet as a group, Mr. President. It was Rosbud first who met with Attorney Mike Arroyo on 28 November, year 2002, a few days before Superintendent Campos was murdered in Parañaque. And then after that, Attorney Mike Arroyo accompanied the President in a state visit to Japan. When he returned, it was the time for him to meet with Victor Corpus. And this happened. The murder of John Campos was committed on December 5. And on December 9, Victor Corpus was one of the very first callers, if not the first caller, of Attorney Mike Arroyo upon his return from the state visit in Japan.
At the same address that you mentioned?
In the same address, Mr. President.
So this is, you have eyewitnesses and documented evidence to the fact that Colonel Corpus goes to this LTA building.
Yes, Mr.
Would
President.
you say how many times, Mr. President?
Quite a few times, but I also have a logbook. Actually, it's an appointment book, which lists down all the visitors or callers of Attorney Mike. On top of that, I have an affidavit of witnesses to show that they, or Victor Corpus and Rosbud, indeed were visiting Attorney Mike Arroyo.
Let me go to that, but first, before I go to that, I should say, Mr. President, you mentioned one meeting. I was asking about the trio. You mentioned a trio. So what is the other meeting? The first meeting was with Miss Mary Ong and the first gentleman, and then
they did not meet all together, Mr. President. Rosbud met with Attorney Mike Arroyo on November 28, and then Victor Corpus met with Attorney Arroyo on the 9th of December 2002. In between, the murder of John Campos transpired.
December 5 was the assassination of John Campos.
That is correct, Mr. President.
At what time on December 5? Early morning of December 5?
Early morning of December 5.
Was that around 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. if I recall the report?
I'm not sure about the exact time, but I do recall that Mary Ong, alias Rosbud, was being interviewed right away.
Yes, around 4 a.m. I think. She was being interviewed.
Pointing to me as the mastermind.
And she knew about the assassination already.
She knew about the assassination.
Pointed to you as the mastermind right away.
That is correct, Mr. President.
As early as that. Thank you, Mr. President. And she is the same Mary Ong that is being alluded to in the committee report.
That is correct, Mr. President.
That has become the passion of some armchair critics, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. President. Now, going to the address, 118 Pereira Street, Legazpi Village, LTA building. That is where you have witnesses to prove that Colonel Corpus goes to or has gone to. And you list a number of names. people in government, like the chairman of the PCSO, PAGCOR, the NAIA, the officials of the Department of Agriculture, an Indian garment trader, the PEA executive, the general manager of the PCSO, Philippine Ports Authority officer, LRT Authority officer. My classmate is also named here, Mr. Tulpo. Mr. Magno is always has been mentioned always. Would you know why they frequent the office, Mr. President?
According to the eyewitness, Mr. President, they're being given money by Attorney Mike Arroyo, except for, of course, the PAGCOR chairman and president. And I would like to refer you to a paragraph in the affidavit
I do not have a
of
copy
the witness.
of
No,
the
I have it,
affidavit.
Mr.
Please.
President, but
Yes.
I'm going to
Yes.
give this out during the committee hearing. Paragraph 8, and I quote, na ang pinakamaraming salapi ng dinala sa aming opisina ay mula kay Ginoong Ephraim Genuino ng PAGCOR. Halos 2 beses isang linggo kung magdala ng salapi na nakalagay sa malaking bag. Si Ginoong Ryan Cordeta, katiwala ni Ginoong Ephraim Genuino.
Would you be able to, did he, when you talk to him personally, did he say ganong kalaki yung bag?
When I talked to him, he told me he was estimating the bag to be containing at least 10 million pesos per visit, Mr. President.
Well, if it's one big bag, 10 million pesos, that's actually pwedeng dalhin. Kasi I will recall during the impeachment trial, there was a claim of 130 million. I don't know how a single person or even two persons can carry 130 million, even in 1,000. So, more or
And
less.
he was in fact present and even was participating in the counting of the money, Mr. President.
I see.
That's the reason why he knew of the amount, the total amount involved for every visit.
Oh, I see. That's a different story then. So this is all contained in affidavit in your possession, and hopefully will be brought out when the Senate committee, the Senate Appropriate Committee, would hear this particular.
He is prepared to be invited. He is prepared to appear as a witness or as a resource person, Mr. President.
The gentleman from Cavite is not prepared to reveal the name of the person who executed the affidavit.
Not as of yet, Mr. President. At the proper time.
Then, Mr. President, the other names you mentioned, like this Kelvin Tan, Thomas To Jr., who you say is the brother of Vicky To, they do not frequent that address. They work in that address. Is that right, Mr. President?
That is their postal address, Mr. President. When they open their accounts, they use the address of the 8th floor of LTI building as their postal or business address. All of them, Mr. President.
Would you know if this Vicky To is married, Mr. President?
She is single, Mr. President.
She is single. But she has children, Mr. President.
She is single, Mr. President.
But she has children. I am just asking. I wonder. There are single parents nowadays, Mr. President. I have many single parent friends.
It appears that our colleague, Senator Oreta, knows
More.
better than I do.
I see. Maybe, probably, Mr. President, at the proper time, we can find out more about this lady. But the names that you mentioned and the 3 names that work there or are there in the building, you also mentioned a Jose Pidal. He does not exist. Is that how is that in your affidavit of the witness? There is no such person.
That's a fictitious name. The name Jose Pidal is being used because the account is still current, Mr. President.
How is he related to
Fictitious.
Jose Velarde, Mr. President?
I really don't know, Mr. President.
First name, ano ha? Most probably katukayo lang. But this is This is different.
Maybe we can ask our distinguished colleague from Bicol, Senator Arroyo. What's the...
He can enlighten us on the difference, probably, because there is a big difference, I understand. You have been, in the course of your expose, Mr. President, it was all on the first gentleman. I ask you point blank, I pick your mind on this, Mr. President. Do you think PGMA knows? If all these allegations are correct,
Mr. President.
if all these allegations are correct, do you think she would know?
I don't want to speculate, Mr. President. We might be charged for rebellion.
Anyway, Mr. President, there are a number of questions probably that I can reserve during the time that this is brought to the committee. But somehow, this expose, whether true or not, well, I suppose you will not stand here on the Senate floor and bring out these documents if there is no truth to most, if not all, of these allegations. No. Now, it gives me some kind of hope for this country, because if an opposition senator will get hold of such documents, ibig sabihin niyan, there are people in the Philippines who still abhor corruption. At may pag-asa pa tayo kahit papano.
It seems that way, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I will wait for the proper time to look more into these allegations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Barbers is recognized.
Before I go to the specifics, Mr. President, I'd like to place it on record that in response to the passing statement of His Honor Senator Lacson about the same charges that were filed against him in the Ombudsman, and why is it that the three committees are investigating. For the record, Mr. President, we are not bound by any decision of any judicial institution. We are not bound by the decision of the Ombudsman. We are separate, Mr. President. The demands of public service and policy would be served, Mr. President, if we have to await the results of the criminal cases and civil cases filed before them, Mr. President. And second, Mr. President, also in passing, before I go to the specifics, in the case of Ador Mawanay, Mr. President, there is a finding by the committees, by the three committees, that he is a witness without credence. He is an unreliable witness. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, we did not input his statements to the report, and I even, Mr. President, propose that we file a perjury charge against Ador Mawanay for lying under oath before the Senate, Mr. President. Just for the record, Mr. President. Now, with the specifics, Mr. President, I'd like to ask His Honor, Senator Lacson, if you have information, as you mentioned a while ago, who are the suspects in the murder of John Campos, Mr. President?
We have, Mr. President, but it's pointless for the witnesses to come out now because the police or the PNP has lost interest in investigating the Campos murder. There's no point bringing this up under the present dispensation.
So, in other words, Mr. President, at the proper time, you will just produce the witnesses.
That's correct, Mr. President. The crime of murder will prescribe in 20 years. So we have enough time to really present the witnesses to give justice to the death of Superintendent Campos. But not this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, you also mentioned a while ago of Mr. Efrem Hinueño, the chairman of the PAGCOR, who comes to the Senate building bringing with him big boxes. Now, Mr. President, is it in the Senate building, Your Honor? Is it in the Senate building?
No, Mr. President, LTA building.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I thought it is in the Senate building, Mr. President, because I'm not a recipient of any box from Hinueño, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, you made a referral, a motion, that your speech be referred to 3 committees. One is the Committee on Accountability of Public Officials. The other one is Committee on Constitutional Amendments. And what is the third one, Mr. President?
Ways and Means, Mr. President.
Now, may I know, Mr. President, why there is a need for us to refer this speech to the Committee on Constitutional Amendments? Just for clarity, Mr. President.
Electoral reforms, Mr. President, to look into reporting regulations of campaign expenses and campaign contributions.
Does this fall within the purview of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Mr. President?
Under electoral reforms, Mr. President, constitutional amendments and revision of codes and laws, it will fit into that committee, that particular aspect of my privileged speech, Mr. President.
Now, Mr. President, you also made mention several times that there were people, prominent people, who visits the office of the First Gentleman in LTA building. You made mention of 2 Supreme Court justices and some other prominent people. May I know who are these Supreme Court justices, Mr. President?
I'm not ready to respond to that question, but at the proper time, Mr. President, I will respond to that question and identify the 2 associate justices.
Now, may I know, Mr. President, if there is anything wrong for a public official or for any private individual, for that matter, to visit the First Gentleman in his office? Most probably he has some private transaction, most probably a courtesy call or a social call. Is there anything wrong, Mr. President?
There's nothing wrong, Mr. President, except when you bring in money or receive money.
And according to you, Mr. President, there were several incidents where money changed hands. Am I correct, Mr. President?
That is correct, Mr. President, as per accounts of the eyewitness or eyewitnesses themselves.
And we are ready to prevent these witnesses at the proper time, Mr. President?
That is correct, Mr. President. They're willing to appear as witnesses in the proper committee hearing, Mr. President.
Now, Mr. President, may I know for the record, how were you able to acquire these pieces of evidence, Mr. President?
Intelligence, Mr. President. Surely I didn't ask tutorship from Colonel Corpus, Mr. President.
I made mention of this, Mr. President, because we might be, or you might be violating laws on the bank secrecy, Mr. President. You might be violating laws on the anti-wiretapping law, and which will make your report, or which will diminish your speech or your report, Mr. President.
I don't remember mentioning that I wiretapped telephones, Mr. President.
Okay, Mr. President. What about the bank statements, Mr. President?
This is a privileged speech, and I think we're shielded with the parliamentary immunity, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, but if it could be proven that there is violation by the banks on the bank secrecy law, Mr. President, action could be taken against them. At any rate, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the money launderer here is Jose Pidal, not Senator Lacson.
Okay, Mr. President, I proceed to another issue. And this is in connection with several anomalies that you mentioned in your speech. We admit, Mr. President, that mention were made on several anomalies in the past and even at present. But, Mr. President, just to be fair with the administration, I know there is an ongoing investigation on some of the anomalies that you mentioned. The anomalies in the PCSO, there is an ongoing investigation. The anomalies on waiting, there is an ongoing investigation. The telecommunications scam, there is an investigation. The Diosdado Macapagal Boulevard, even the Senate has conducted its own investigation. So, just to be fair with them, Mr. President, I would say that all the anomalous transactions that you mentioned are already incorporated in the investigation conducted by the administration or by the government, Mr. President.
That is the reason why I just mentioned them in passing, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, I included that in my statement of fact in the early part of my privilege speech. I did not belabor discussing these different anomalies, Mr. President.
Now, Mr. President, in the case of Al Ghuzi, the escape of Al Ghuzi, it was also mentioned, and you said it is the result of corruption in Mrs. Arroyo government. Can you expound on this clearly, Mr. President?
I did not say that, Mr. President. Washington Times said that. I was just quoting Washington Times, the editorial.
So it was Washington Times.
Yes, Mr. President.
I stand corrected, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Now, in the case of the Luwalhati Foundation, Mr. President, if my memory will serve me right, there was an admission from Edgar Manda and even from the first gentleman that there were donations channeled to the Luwalhati Foundation. And again, if my memory will serve me right, there is an ongoing investigation of this transaction in the House or in the Senate. So may I be clarified on this, Mr. President?
That is correct, Mr. President. Part of the contribution made by ex-Congressman Mark Jimenez really went to Luwalhati Foundation. But out of 8 million, only 3 million was deposited in the account of Luwalhati Foundation. And the remaining 5 million ended up at the Union Bank Pereira branch in the account of Jose Pidal. There's nothing wrong with the 3 million that was deposited in the Luwalhati Foundation account, but there's something very wrong with the 5 million that was deposited in a fictitious account, because that's a contribution to a foundation.
Yeah, I focus on this, Mr. President, because, as I said, if my memory will serve me right, there was an admission from Edgar Manda about the amount of 8 million pesos. Anyway, that will be tackled.
His admission will be negated by documentary evidence, Mr. President.
Anyway, Mr. President, that will be tackled during the committee investigation. Now, in the case of Virgilio Angelo, Mr. President, former general manager of the Philippine Charity Sweepstakes, transferred to OWA, which has billions in trust funds, the pawis ng bagong bayani. Would you kindly expound clearly on this, Mr. President?
More details will be supplied by the witness when we are already conducting the committee hearings, Mr. President, assuming that we will investigate this matter.
Yes, Mr. President, I ask this because, again, I know for a fact, Mr. President, that there is an investigation going on against the anomalous transactions of the OWA, Mr. President. And that is the reason why Wilhelm Soriano was replaced by President Arroyo, because of the alleged anomalies committed, Mr. President. Now, in the case of Ramon Tulfo, Mr. President, where it is mentioned here in this report that he is a certified extortionist masquerading as a columnist. Would you kindly expound on this, Mr. President, because we might differ in this regard, as I have high respects for Tulfo, and also, Mr. President, he has been with journalism for a long, long time, and I have not heard of any complaint filed against Ramon Tulfo, Mr. President. Would you kindly expound on this, Mr. President?
I am glad you brought that out, Mr. President. I have a personal experience with Mr. Ramon Tulfo. When I assumed as Chief of the Philippine National Police last November 16, 1999, I was confronted with a payola, number 1 on the list in that ledger, in that payola, was Mr. Ramon Tulfo, receiving from the PNP 250,000 pesos a month. And when I assumed office, I asked my controller, what is this for? Among others, Mr. President, I won't mention anymore the names of the other media personalities, but very prominent on that list was the name of, or is the name of Ramon Tulfo. So when I asked him, what will happen if we terminate this? Ang sagot niya sa akin, Mr. President, babanatan tayo. Ang sagot ko sa kanya, wala naman tayong gagawing masama rito. Eh di, magtrabaho lang tayo. So, it's unfortunate because there was no malice, absolutely no malice in my mind. I shredded that document. And if you can recall, Mr. President, after that incident, there was a complete turnaround with the way Mr. Tulfo is treating me now. Because before, he was all praises for me. But when I assumed as Chief PNP and I terminated the payola, he hated my guts. He started hating my guts. No end, Mr. President. So I'm glad you brought that out. I have a very sad personal experience with Mr. Tulfo. And I was also a witness when he was dealing with a former provincial director in a southern Tagalog province. Ang sabi niya doon sa provincial director, kung saan-saan ka na nalipat, hindi mo na ako kinontak. Sa 10,000 lang isang buwan, naka-1 taon ka na. Dapat bayaran mo ako ng 120. That is Mr. Tulfo for you, Mr. President.
I brought this out, Mr. President, because your statement on Mr. Tulfo is contrary to what I know of him, Mr. President. As I said, did you not confront him about the 250,000 that you mentioned, Mr. President? Just to be clear, whether indeed it's really Mr. Tulfo, Mr. President.
Very clear ang pangalan, Mr. President.
No, I mean, did you not confront him, Mr. President, personally?
I had no malice in my mind. Ang inisip ko lang noon, Mr. President, was that I was assuming a position with awesome responsibility, and it was clear in my mind that I would just be working to reform the police, to bring back the old glory of the police. So, wala na akong ibang iniisip noon, Mr. President. Kung mayroon akong malis, dapat tinago ko yon for future reference. Marami nakalista doon.
Kasi, Mr. President, it has also been my experience when I was with the police force, na yung mga tauhan natin, mayroong mga binabanggit na pangalan, pero mga fictitious, hindi totoo.
Mr. President, controller yung kaharap ko, yung nagbibigay mismo ng pera.
As I said, Mr. President, I do not argue with that. My only question is, had you had any chance of talking to Tulfo?
I did not, Mr. President.
Yeah, Mr. President. As I said, I have a different view on Mr. Tulfo, Mr. President, as I know him to be a responsible journalist. Now, Mr. President, going to Alex Magno, political analyst. Can you expound clearly on this, Mr. President? What do you mean by dating kagalang-galang, sayang?
I will leave it to the witness when he is eventually presented during the committee hearings to expound on what Mr. Alex Magno has been doing or was doing when he was reporting to Attorney Mike Arroyo.
So, in other words, Mr. President, this statement came from a source, from a witness.
Under oath, Mr. President.
Dating kagalang-galang. Yes, Mr. President. Now, about Ms. Marisa Bundok, Mr. President, another media figure. What is her participation and what is her involvement, Mr. President?
I heard she's the wife of Jarius Bundok, a columnist of Philippine Star, who keeps on hitting me almost in almost every column. Kaya pala.
Mr. President, do I hear you right that Ms. Marisa Bundok is also hitting you?
No, Mr. President. Mrs. Marisa Bundok is the wife of Jarius Bundok.
And who is hitting you, Mr. President? Mr. Jarius Bundok.
Yes, Mr. President.
Now, what is the reason why the name of the wife is mentioned in this speech, Mr. President?
Because she's the one reporting to 8th floor LTA building, Mr. President. That's why her name was mentioned by the eyewitness.
Yeah, I made mention of this, Mr. President, because people might say that because you're being hit in the media, you're including them of their involvement in some anomalous transaction. Now, in the case of Ronaldo Puno, Mr. President, what is his involvement?
It's the same thing, Mr. President. I'll leave it to the eyewitness at the proper time.
So in other words, Mr. President, we will be waiting for more revelation from the witness at the proper time, Mr. President.
As I mentioned in my privilege speech, Mr. President, this is only chapter 1.
How many chapters more, Mr. President?
Maybe 2 or 3 and 1 epilogue.
Yes, Mr. President. So these are the things that I want to be clarified, Mr. President. As I said, although there was already mention of several anomalies in the government, but to be fair with everybody, Mr. President, investigations have been conducted, investigations are being conducted, and investigations will also be conducted. Now, in the case of the first gentleman, Mr. President, these are serious accusations, and I could not ask for any more question, because, as you said, the witness will be the one to make the revelation at the proper time, Mr. President. Am I correct, Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Majority Leader. All right, Majority Leader.
May I request for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President? Mr. President, I move to refer the speech of Senator Lacson and all the interpellations to the Blue Ribbon Committee, primarily, and the Constitutional Amendments and the Ways and Means Committee, secondarily.
Any objection? Senator Arroyo.
Mr. President, insofar as referring that to the Blue Ribbon Committee, that's fine with me. But insofar as referring that to the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws, this would be out of place because the jurisdiction of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws is as follows. All matters proposing amendments to the Constitution of the Philippines and the compilation and revision of existing codes and laws, election laws and implementation of constitutional provisions on initiative and referendum on legislative acts, recall of elective officials, the role and rights of people's organizations, and sectoral or party list representatives. It is outside of the jurisdiction of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws. If there's a third committee that should take part, it would be better if we referred to the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions and Currencies, the jurisdiction of which reads, all matters relating to banks, financial institutions, government and private currencies, capital markets, mutual funds, securitization, coinage, and circulation of money. Committee on Banks is chaired by Senator Sergio the third, Mr. President.
May I respond to that?
Senator Lacson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the speech be referred to the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Electoral Reforms, and Revision of Codes and Laws so that appropriate measures may be crafted to plug loopholes in campaign spending and reporting regulations, Mr. President. In this case, they reported, or the campaign manager then, Attorney Mike Arroyo, reported only 50.2 million pesos out of 300 or more million pesos. So we need to craft a legislative measure to look into this, Mr. President, or to improve the reporting regulations and campaign spending.
Your Honor, every legislation here has somehow to revise the law. If that is the case, then every law, every matter on the table will have to be referred to the Committee on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Laws. So, the electoral forms is just an incident to this. Mr. President, I've raised this subject over and over again, that in the referral to the committees, the correct committee must handle it. Now, as between the Committee on Banks. In fact, it doesn't matter. It will go to the minority anyway, because the Committee on Banks is headed by the minority member, Senator Serge Osmeña. And in the case of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, etc., is headed by Senator Angara. But what we have seen here is that sometimes the one who delivers the speech recommends to what committee it should go to. I thought that when a speech is a speech is delivered, the referral is only made after a study is made by the Committee on Rules. Why don't we refer it to the Committee on Rules, Mr. President, so that it can be studied?
Mr. President, if you're ready to rule, Mr. President, I will no longer say anything about it. I'm sure...
I just have a question, Mr. President.
Please proceed, Senator Lacson.
Yes, Mr. President, if that's the case, then which committee has jurisdiction on election laws? If not the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws. We're talking here of electoral reforms. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Senator Lacson talked about bank accounts. In fact, the thrust of the speech is all about bank accounts. That is what we would be investigating here will be the bank accounts. And therefore, if it is the bank accounts that we will have to investigate, then let it be the secondary should be the Committee on Banks. Where does the Constitutional Amendments Committee come in here? I've read the entire speech, and it's all, aside from the investigation, in fact, it is more banking than anything else. So I respectfully submit that.
May I, Mr. President?
I'm sorry, Minority Leader.
May I, Mr. President?
Yes, please.
Yes, the point here, Mr. President, is that first of all, there is nothing wrong if the one delivering the privilege speech recommends or moves that a certain committee. Actually, he would be the best person to know where his thoughts or his thesis goes to. But be that as it may, Mr. President, the point here is that it is the wish of the privilege speech owner that this be referred to the Committee on Electoral Reforms. And rightly so, the Committee on Electoral Reforms should look into this particular matter. And that is the Constitutional and Amendments Revision of Laws Committee, where the Electoral Reforms Committee is just incidental. There is nothing in the Constitutional or Revision of Laws that should be looked at, we must admit, but it's the Electoral Reforms Committee that should look into this matter, Mr. President. I believe so. So we submit to the wisdom of the Chair. I am very positive that you will look at it that way. Thank you, Mr. President.
First, the Chair must clarify that the referral to a particular committee is not upon the wishes of any member of the Chamber, but is governed by our rules. Now, there are times when admittedly the jurisdiction of the different committees would interlock. Under may I remind our colleagues that under Section 15 of our rules, it states that when a measure covers subject matters falling within the jurisdiction of more than one committee, it shall be referred to not more than 2 committees. Provided, however, that a motion for the referral to a third committee shall be referred to the Committee on Rules. The Chair therefore rules that the primary committee, there is no dispute, is the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigation. And so the speech is referred as a primary committee to the Blue Ribbon Committee. Insofar as the secondary committees are concerned, meaning the Committee on Banks, Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Committee on Ways and Means, the Chair refers the same to the Committee on Rules in order to resolve which committee would have jurisdiction over the same, including whether or not it should be referred to 3 committees. The Chair so rules.